What happens when the most carefully protected public image in the world walks into a room where the protection does not work? Where the cameras are already rolling and the audience is already seated and the host has been doing this for 20 years and has not yet learned that there are guests you prepare for and guests you cannot prepare for, regardless of how many years you have been doing this or how many people you have interviewed or how thoroughly your team has researched the person who is about to sit down across from you and smile the smile that does not reach the eyes. What happens is that the room changes the moment they walk into it. The energy that was there before they arrived, the specific and slightly buzzing energy of a morning television studio where everything is going to plan and the day is proceeding in the direction the rundown has specified, that energy changes when they walk in, and the change is not the change that celebrity produces in a room, not the familiar recalibration of a space around someone more famous than most of the people in it. It is a different change. Smaller and quieter and more specific and in some ways more significant, because it is not the change of something arriving but the change of something being managed, the change of a room in which the ordinary social negotiation that happens when people share a space has been replaced by something more deliberate and more controlled and more carefully organized around the requirement that things go a specific way and the awareness, present in the person who has entered and absent in the people already there, that they might not. Ripa was in the room when Meghan Markle walked in. She had been in the room for 20 years. She had sat in the chair that was her chair for 20 years, and she had done what the chair required with the specific and completely genuine quality of someone who understood the job and who loved the job and who was good at the job in the way that only people who love the thing they're good at are good at it, which is the way that looks effortless because it mostly is. Because 20 years of doing something well produces in the person doing it the specific and genuine ease of the mastered thing, the ease that is not the absence of effort but the complete integration of effort into the doing of the thing, so that the effort is no longer visible as effort but simply as the thing being done. She was in the room and she was ready for the morning, and the morning was going the way mornings on that show went, and then Meghan Markle walked through the door and the morning stopped going the way mornings on that show went. Ripa has a specific and recognizable quality that the people who have watched her for 2 decades understand as her specific quality rather than as something they could describe precisely, a quality that is warm in the way that warmth is warm when it is real rather than performed, that is genuinely interested in the people she sits across from in the way that genuine interest is different from the performance of interest, that has the specific and slightly rare quality of someone who has been doing this long enough to no longer need the performance, because the thing itself, the actual curiosity and the actual warmth and the actual pleasure of talking to people and finding in the talking the specific and generative quality of the thing said and the thing heard and the connection that those two things produce between the people doing the saying and the hearing, is simply present in her in the way that things that are genuinely part of a person are present in them. She had interviewed everyone. Every category of person that morning television produces, the movie stars and the musicians and the athletes and the reality television personalities and the politicians and the authors and the people who had done something extraordinary that the world needed to know about and the people who had done something terrible that the world was already talking about, and every other category in between and outside those categories. She had interviewed everyone, and she had brought to each of them the specific and consistent quality of her genuine engagement with the person rather than the subject, the interest in who they were rather than simply in what they had done or what they were there to promote or what position they occupied in the current cultural conversation. 20 years of this had not diminished the quality. It was still real. It was still present. It was still the thing that the people who sat across from her felt, and that made the chair across from Ripa a place where people talked rather than simply said things. And then Meghan Markle sat in the chair. The interview began where these interviews always began, with the easy exchange, the welcome and the thanks and the light and comfortable territory of the opening minutes that serve the purpose of establishing the register of the conversation before the conversation proceeds into the things it is actually going to be about. Kelly did what Kelly always did in these opening minutes, which was to be genuinely warm in the specific and personal way that made the opening minutes feel like the beginning of a real conversation rather than the performance of one. To create the specific and slightly intimate quality of two people who are going to talk honestly about real things in a room that happens to have cameras in it rather than two people who are performing an interview for an audience. It was a quality she had developed over 20 years and that she produced reliably because it was not a technique she deployed but a genuine quality she possessed, the quality of someone for whom the conversation with the person across from her was the actual thing rather than the vehicle for the segment. She offered it. The offer was genuine. The offer was everything she had, the full 20 years of the genuine quality, placed in the room and directed at the person across from her with the complete and unambiguous sincerity of someone who was not managing an interaction but having one. Meghan Markle received it the way she received things that were not entirely on the terms she had set in advance for the receiving. Not with hostility. Not with anything that the camera would catch in the first seconds and that would have told the room immediately that the morning was going to be different from what the morning was supposed to be. With a quality that was much more subtle than hostility and much more difficult to name and in some ways much more effective at producing the specific and slightly disorienting effect it produced, which was the effect of warmth meeting something that was not quite warmth and not quite its opposite and that left the warmth in a position that warmth is not designed to be in, which is the position of the thing that has been offered and not quite received in the way it was offered. She smiled. The smile was good. The smile was the smile that people who had studied Meghan Markle's public appearances had learned to look at and to understand as the smile that contained more calculation than warmth, that was precise in the way that calculated things are precise and warm in the way that performed warmth is warm, which is the way that warmth is warm when the performance is very good but not quite as warm as the way warmth is warm when it is simply warmth, the way that leaves a small and specific gap between the offered and the received, the gap that most people in the room would not have noticed and that Ripa, who had 20 years of experience of what the genuine thing felt like and therefore an unusually accurate sense of when the received thing was slightly different from the offered thing, noticed. She asked the first question. Something about balance. The specific and gentle and apparently easy question that was designed to let the guest find their footing in the conversation, to give them the room to be comfortable and to present themselves in the way they wanted to present themselves and to move the exchange into the pleasant territory that the morning called for. It was the right question. It was the question that Ripa's 20 years of experience had determined was the right question for this moment with this guest at this point in the morning, the question that gave the most to the person being asked and asked the least in return, that was generous in the specific and professional way that the good host's first question is generous. Meghan Markle heard the question and she did the thing that the question had not been designed to accommodate, which was to answer a different question, to take the thing that had been offered and to turn it toward the thing that she wanted to be talking about rather than the thing that had been asked, to use the first answer to establish the terms of the conversation in a way that was not the terms that the question had proposed. The answer was polished and it was complete in the sense that it addressed something and did so at length and with the practiced quality of something that had been thought about and prepared and that was being deployed now as the opening move in the specific kind of engagement with an interview that was not the engagement of a person who was going to have the interview but of a person who was going to manage the interview, who understood the interview as the territory to be controlled rather than the conversation to be had. Kelly noticed. This is the thing about Ripa that the people who underestimated her, and there were always people who underestimated her, consistently got wrong. The warmth was real and the warmth was present and the warmth was everything she was bringing to the morning. And underneath the warmth was 20 years of professional intelligence that missed very little of what was happening in the room and that was entirely capable of processing the something that had just happened and of understanding what the something meant for the morning ahead. She noticed that the answer had not been the answer to her question. She noticed that the not answering of her question while appearing to answer it was a quality that the answer had been designed to have rather than a coincidence of the answer's direction. She noticed and she adjusted with the specific and invisible quality of someone who has been doing this long enough that the adjustment does not require a visible pause for processing but happens in the gap between the noticing and the next question, in the fraction of a second during which the experienced host determines where to go from where they are without letting the determination show in anything that the audience would be able to see. She adjusted and she asked the next question. The next question was lighter. An invitation rather than an inquiry. The kind of question that gestures toward the pleasant and the personal and the human and that gives the guest the opportunity to engage on a level that is less managed and more natural, to step out of the prepared material and into the more spontaneous and more genuine territory that the best morning television conversations reached when the guest allowed them to reach it. It was Ripa offering another door. The door was genuinely open. Kelly meant the opening genuinely, the way she meant everything genuinely, with the specific and complete quality of someone for whom the offering of the door was the honest and hopeful thing rather than the strategic and self-serving thing. Meghan Markle looked at the open door and did not walk through it. She closed it in the specific and practiced way that the question about recommending restaurants had revealed. She was going to close every door that did not lead somewhere she had decided she was going to go, which was to say something that questioned the door's worthiness, that placed the door in the category of the superficial in a way that was both polite and clearly not entirely polite, that left the person who had offered the door in the position of someone whose offering had been found wanting. The word superficial sat in the room. It did the thing that words sit in a room and do when they have arrived carrying more than their dictionary meaning, when they are the vehicle for something that the dictionary meaning alone does not contain, when the word is the surface of an attitude and the attitude is the thing that is actually speaking. The audience felt it. The specific and slightly uncomfortable shift of people who have been enjoying the warmth of a morning television program and have encountered something that is the opposite of that warmth, that has the quality of a temperature drop in a room where everyone had been comfortable. That produces in the people experiencing it the specific and involuntary response of people who do not want to be cold but who are cold now regardless of whether they want to be. Mark Consuelos, who had been in the chair beside Kelly with the specific and slightly secondary quality that the co-host occupies when the interview is primarily between the host and the guest, did the thing that people do when they are witnessing something that they are not sure how to respond to and that they are grateful they are not the one primarily responsible for responding to, which was to look at Kelly with the specific and entirely communicative look of a person who has witnessed something and who is communicating to the person they are looking at that they too have witnessed it and that the witnessing is significant, the look that said without saying it, this is happening and I see it and you see it and I am very glad that you are the one who has to figure out what to do about it. Kelly did not do what the discomfort in the room might have suggested she should do, which was to retreat to even safer territory, to move the conversation further away from anything that might produce more of the quality that the word superficial had introduced, to protect the remaining time of the segment from anything that might produce more of the specific and slightly alarming temperature drop that the audience had just experienced. This would have been the easier choice and in certain respects the more professionally conservative choice and the choice that would have produced a morning that ended in the usual way with the guest departing and the show continuing and the temperature returning to normal and the specific incident of the word superficial becoming simply a moment that had happened rather than the first indication of something larger that was building. Kelly did not make that choice. She was too good at what she did and had too much integrity in the doing of it to make that choice. She kept asking questions. Not aggressive questions. Not the questions of someone who had decided that the guest across from her was a target and was now aiming at the target. The questions of someone who had been given a job and who was going to do the job with the specific and complete quality of professionalism that doing the job well required, who was not going to stop asking the questions that the morning called for simply because the person she was asking them to was demonstrating an uncomfortable preference for not answering them. Meghan deflected again. And again. Each deflection was its own small thing and each small thing had the quality of the practice thing, the quality of something that had been done before in previous rooms with previous interviews and that had worked in those rooms and that was being deployed again now with the expectation that it would work here too. The pattern was visible to Kelly and was visible to the audience and was visible to the cameras and was becoming visible in a way that was different from the way that it had been visible in the first deflection, which was the way that things become visible when they have happened enough times that the pattern is undeniable. When the first instance might have been a coincidence and the second instance might have been a style preference and the third instance is a strategy and the fourth instance is the strategy being executed with a thoroughness that is no longer compatible with the pretense that there is no strategy. The deflections accumulated. Each one was polite. Each one was delivered with the same smooth and practiced quality that all of the answers had been delivered with. And the accumulation of the polite and practiced deflections had the specific and slightly strange effect of making the politeness itself feel less polite than it would have felt if there had been fewer deflections, of making the practiced quality feel more calculated than it would have felt if the calculation had not been so evident in its consistency, of making the whole of the exchange feel managed in the way that only the very thorough management of something makes it feel managed, which is the way that makes the management more visible than the absence of management would have been. Kelly asked the question that was the question underneath all the questions she had been asking, the question that the morning had been building toward not because she had planned for it to build toward it but because the building was what the morning itself was doing in response to what was happening in it, the question that arrived not from the preparation but from the real-time intelligence of someone who was present in what was happening and who was responding to what was happening with the Specific and professional clarity of someone who understood that what was happening was the thing that the interview was actually about, and that the thing the interview was actually about deserved to be addressed directly. She said it in the warm tone that was her natural register, the warmth that was not diminished by the specificity of the question, and that in fact made the question more rather than less pointed, in the way that things said warmly and clearly are sometimes more direct than things said sharply and aggressively, because the sharpness and the aggression provide the resistance of the delivered blow rather than the specific and open quality of the simply stated thing. She said she wanted to understand what Meghan was looking for from the conversation. She said this with the genuine quality of someone who genuinely wanted to understand it, and whose wanting to understand it was itself a form of respect, the form of respect that says the person across from me is capable of answering this question honestly, and I believe that the honest answer would be more useful to both of us than any of the deflections that have preceded it. Meghan Markle's expression changed. Not dramatically. The dramatic change would have been easier for everyone in the room, because the dramatic change is legible and provides a clear signal about what is happening and what the appropriate response to what is happening is. What happened was smaller and more interesting than the dramatic change, the specific and very controlled quality of something that wanted to be larger but was being held at the size that the control could maintain, of a reaction that was real but that was being managed at the level of its visible expression, even as the managing of it was itself becoming a visible quality. The management and the thing being managed both present in the expression simultaneously, each one making the other more rather than less apparent. She said something about the media. She said it in the specific and familiar way that the media had been referred to in the conversation she had had in the years of the narrative that her public life had produced, the way that the media was a category and the category had a specific and predetermined meaning, and the meaning was the meaning of the thing that had been her antagonist in the story she had been telling, and that she was now placing Kelly Ripa inside. Not explicitly. Not in the way that would have made the placing explicit and therefore defensible in the explicit way. In the way of the implication, of the looking that meant the looking rather than the words that the looking accompanied, of the letting the meaning be there without being said directly so that it could not be addressed directly without the addresser looking like the one who had said it. Kelly looked at her. The look lasted long enough to be a thing, to be the look that the moment required and that the moment was producing in someone who had been doing this for 20 years and who understood what the moment was and what the moment needed from her. She said the thing that she said. She said it in the voice that was her voice, the warm and clear voice that was the voice she brought to everything. And she said that she asked questions because asking questions was the job, and that the job was the thing she had been doing for 20 years, and that she had no interest in being anyone's antagonist and no interest in producing any experience for the person across from her that was anything other than the honest and complete engagement of one person with another in the specific and real context of a morning television interview. She said this without the edge that the situation might have produced in a person with less control of their own register and with more investment in the outcome of the exchange as a measure of their own success. She said it flatly and cleanly and with the specific quality of someone who is stating something true rather than defending something contested, who is not arguing but simply saying, who has no need for the argument because the thing she is saying does not require the argument, it only requires the saying. The room was very quiet for a moment that was slightly longer than the usual moments in that room. The specific and held quality of the quiet that settles over a space when something has been said that the space needs time to absorb, that has landed with enough weight that the immediate filling of the space with the next thing would not have served the thing that had been said or the people who had heard it or the moment that the saying of it had produced. Meghan Markle sat in the quiet, and the sitting in the quiet had a quality that was different from the quality of the rest of the exchange, that had the quality of someone who had not anticipated this specific and particular variety of quiet and who was now in it and was processing what being in it meant for what was supposed to happen next. The audience sat in the quiet with her. The audience had been following the exchange with the specific and increasingly engaged quality of people who had come to watch one thing and were watching something else, who had come to watch a morning television program and were watching something that was more than a morning television program, that had the specific and slightly alarming quality of something being real in a way that morning television was not usually real, that had the quality of the actual thing happening rather than the performance of the thing, that was producing in them the specific and deeply attentive response of people who understand that what they are witnessing is not the managed version of an experience but the experience itself. And then Meghan Markle said the thing she said. She said it quietly. Not the quiet of someone who is being gentle or who is moderating the intensity of what they are saying out of consideration for the person they are saying it to. The quiet of someone who is certain that what they are saying is going to land with enough force that the quiet is the appropriate delivery because the delivery does not need the volume, that the thing itself is sufficient and the quiet is simply the most efficient container for the sufficient thing. She said that Kelly was going to regret this. She said it to Kelly directly and in the specific tone of the thing said by someone who believes they have the power to make the thing true, who is not making a prediction but an announcement, who is telling someone something about what is going to happen in the way that people tell people things about what is going to happen when they believe they control what is going to happen. She said it quietly and she meant it, and the meaning of it was in the room with the specific and slightly shocking clarity of something that had been said on a morning television program that morning television programs were not the usual setting for. She stood up. The standing up was the thing that the exchange had been building toward without anyone in the room knowing it was building toward it, the thing that became inevitable the moment it happened and that had not been inevitable until the moment it happened. The specific and peculiar quality of the significant moment, which is always the quality of something that was going to happen once it has happened and that was not going to happen right up until the moment it did. She stood, and the standing had the specific quality of a deliberate action rather than an impulsive one, of something that had been decided rather than something that was being done in the grip of an emotion that had exceeded the capacity to contain it, of a person who had made a calculation and was now implementing the calculation with the specific and slightly frightening quality of someone whose calculations are implemented fully rather than partially. She reached for the microphone that was clipped to her clothing and she was not entirely successful at removing it, which added a brief and slightly undignified quality to the leaving, but not enough of an undignified quality to diminish the larger statement that the leaving was making. The specific and unmistakable statement of someone who has decided that the room they are in is no longer a room they are willing to be in and who is acting on that decision in the most direct available way, which is to leave the room. She left. She walked across the studio with the specific and slightly theatrical quality of a departure that is aware of itself as a departure and that intends the departure to be seen and understood as the statement it is, and she went through the door that the studio had and out into the space that was not the studio, and the studio was left with what the departure had produced in it, which was the specific and very particular kind of silence that is not the quiet before the next thing but the silence after something that has changed the nature of the room it happened in. Kelly Ripa sat in the chair that was her chair. She had been in the chair for 20 years and the chair had seen many things and many things had happened in the room around the chair, and Kelly Ripa had been in the chair for all of them and had handled all of them with the specific and genuine quality of professionalism that was her quality. That was what 20 years of doing this job had produced in her, that was most valuable and most durable and most completely hers. She sat in the chair and the room around the chair was in the state that the departure had left it in, and she was in the chair in the middle of that state, and the cameras were still running because the cameras on live television always run regardless of what is happening in front of them, and the audience was in the seats and the show was still happening in the technical sense that the show was still broadcasting to the people who were watching it at home and who had watched everything that had happened and who were now watching Kelly Ripa sit in the chair in the room in the aftermath of the departure. She was very still for a moment. The very stillness was its own communication. And then she spoke. She said she wanted to address what had happened. She said it in the specific and direct way that very few morning television hosts would have chosen to say it, that required a quality of straightforwardness that the format did not usually reward and that the situation certainly did not require, and that she chose anyway because it was the honest thing, and the honest thing was the thing she was going to do regardless of whether it was the easy thing. She said she asked questions. She said that was her job. She said she was not going to apologize for doing her job. And then she said the thing that the people who watched the program and the people who would watch the clip of the program in the hours and days and weeks after it aired would quote and would remember and would use as the specific and compressed expression of what the morning had produced. The thing that said in 5 words what the entire morning had been about, and that was therefore more efficient than the entire morning and also more permanent in the specific way that the thing that says the whole of something in 5 words is always more permanent than the whole of something said in its actual length. She said cameras do not lie. The show continued. It continued with the specific and slightly depleted energy of a show that has had something happen in it that it has not fully processed and that is now proceeding through the remainder of its scheduled content with the quality of something that is continuing because continuing is what it does, because the morning is still happening and the cameras are still on and the audience is still in the seats and the job is still the job and the job requires the continuing regardless of what has preceded the continuing. Kelly continued it with the specific and professional quality of someone who is doing the thing that needs to be done because it needs to be done and who is not going to perform the distress of what has happened or to let the distress of what has happened become the visible content of the remaining minutes. Because the visible content of the remaining minutes was not going to be her distress but the steady and professional and completely genuine quality of someone who had done their job the way their job was supposed to be done and who was continuing to do it in exactly that way regardless of what the morning had produced around the doing of it. What happened after the morning was what always happens after a morning that has produced something real in the specific and alarming and completely unmanaged way that this morning had produced something real, which is that the conversation about what happened became its own thing, a thing that was larger in some respects than the thing itself, that had the specific quality of things that happen in public and that the public then processes publicly, through the shared and distributed mechanism of the response and the counter-response and the opinion and the counter-opinion and all the other forms that public processing takes in the specific environment of the contemporary media landscape where the processing happens fast and widely and at a volume that can quickly exceed the scale of the original thing. The clip circulated. The specific moments within the clip circulated separately and the separate circulation of the specific moments produced the specific and slightly distorting effect that the separate circulation of specific moments always produces, which is the effect of the moment without the context and the context without the moment and neither of them in the relationship that the full experience of the thing provided. But enough of the thing itself survived the circulation to communicate something real about what had happened, enough of the Kelly Ripa who said cameras do not lie and the Meghan Markle who had demonstrated the specific and particular quality of herself that the morning had demonstrated survived the circulation to tell the people who had not been there something true about what being there would have been like. Kelly Ripa had done her job. She had done it for 20 years and she had done it on this morning in the specific way that the morning had required, which was not the way the morning had been planned to require and not the way that either person in the interview had arrived expecting it to require but the way it had required once it became the morning it became, the way that required the asking of the questions and the holding of the professional ground and the saying of the true thing in the clear voice and the staying in the chair after the departure and the addressing of what had happened directly and the 5 words that said the whole of it. She had done it and the doing of it was the specific and lasting record of a morning that had produced something real and that the cameras had caught in the way that cameras catch things that are real, which is completely and without the modification that the management of things would have produced, which is exactly as they happened and in the form they happened in and with all the qualities that the happening had, including the qualities that nobody had planned for and that nobody would have chosen if the choice had been available but that were there because they were real and because real things are there regardless of whether anyone has planned for them or chosen them or would have chosen them if the choice had been theirs to make. The cameras had caught it. And the cameras, as Kelly Ripa had said, did not lie.